This session is going to be about procurement, in particular, market testing, specifications, and making the business case for your projects. My guest today is Nicola Dyer. He's an expert on grant funding. Nicola will answer some questions later, and we've also got a couple of QSs and experts from heritage funding backgrounds here who can help you with questions as we go along. So there's a lot of misunderstandings about what procurement is. I think this is a definition which is usable. I mean, it's probably a tiny bit garnished in as much as procurement is in the buying of goods and services. So we can all understand that we might be either a buyer or a seller in the procurement process. But actually, it's more important to think about it in terms of supply chains. And one of the situations that I think a lot of you as practitioners will have been in is that you are, as say you're an architect, that you're commissioning the digital twin for your client. So in actual fact, the end user is their needs are filtered through the supply chain. And the procurement element of that is that it isn't just about the buying and selling of goods and services, it's also about the design of them and the overall resilience of that supply chain. Obviously, two of the major resilience factors for me are profitability, because obviously one of the real threats to our sector is attracting people in, getting enough people here. If they can't survive because there's not a living here, they'll go and work somewhere else. So obviously we're in a competitive situation from that point of view. And so we want our work to be profitable in the sense of enriching the people who work in it, in the sector. But we also want our work to be ethical, because the heritage is for everybody. Remember, the heritage principles are that the heritage is for all time. So it's not just for people who are alive now, it's for people who we hope will enjoy these assets in the future and for their own reasons. In terms of procurement, most people, when they think about procurement and they use that word procurement, it's because they're working in the public sector, and public sector procurement is quite heavily regulated. These are some of the acts and regulations that have been affecting public procurement over the last sort of decade or so. We come to public procurement at an interesting time. As you can see, three of those four major pieces of legislation governing public procurement, and particularly the ethical background about it and the sort of social resilience of good procurement, were pre-Brexit. And this made a massive difference because a lot of our procurement regulations were aligned to European procurement directives. Nothing wrong with that, because in fact they match our own objectives. There was never any conflict there. So the EU directives that were dealing with the principles of procurement, obviously to avoid discrimination, to aid the free movement of goods. So it's very interesting that we're at a time when tariffs might become an issue again. But obviously, for much of the last sort of 50 years, work has gone on to try and remove tariffs and to ensure the free movement of goods and services to some extent. And also the freedom of establishment, to give people the right to have control over their workplaces and their supply lines and so on, with a view to making them more resilient. Apart from those general principles, there was also the overall legal framework of the European Court of Justice, which again embeds equality at the highest level. And this avoidance of corruption, I think one of the main feelings you get from the procurement regulations, and they're very much trying to avoid, for public sector governments, spending money with people who've got, sought some kind of economic advantage, and that aren't necessarily the right provider for the work in hand. Because it's those the European principles is mutual recognition, so making sure that we understood what the equivalent was for each locality. And I think that's still relevant within United Kingdom, that we've got our own home nations with their own different values and systems. and also making sure that they're proportional. Which brings us to the Public Procurement Act 2023, because obviously as we came out of Europe, we took most of those principles and put them into our own 2020 regulations. And these have now been completely superseded by the 23 Public Procurement Act, which is the overarching act under which all the regulations will sit in the tiers. The principal change of the Public Procurement Act 2023, the one thing that I want you to take home is this change from MEAT to MAT. So the acronym MEAT stands for Most Economically Advantageous Tender. And that's now gone to the Most Advantageous Tender. So it is sort of deprioritized the economic aspect of your bid, and I think that's really good for the heritage sector, because there's a lot of variables around what makes a good digital model, and you'll have seen this through all the different sessions as we've come here, and what makes one that's economically advantageous. They're very different things, and a lot of the geospatial surveyors who've come on this course have said make sure people know the difference between something that's been properly put together and something that is, you know, maybe pretty light and, you know, fit for a purpose, but not as accurate and not as user friendly as something that's been prepared within a professional framework. I just took this straight from the 23 Act so that you could just, these are the actual guidance notes that are on the government website. The new Act is hope that it will streamline it and save time both for the public bodies who are procuring goods and services and for suppliers as well. So we're all for that, because tendering can be a really resource hungry process, and it's got an element of waste in it. So, you know, if 5 firms bid for a job and there's only one job, then 4 of them will have wasted their time, and there's an inherent cost to the sector from that. I think it is worth, this is a piece of guidance from nearly a decade ago, over a decade ago, but it was published by RICS, and it just makes sure that people understand the difference. Procurement includes tendering, but tendering doesn't include procurement. It's just a component of it. And within tendering, apologies to the QS, we tend to work in sort of 3 different forms of tendering. Single stage is where everybody bids together. The bid opens on day 1, it closes on day 21, and there's just one step in that. And at the end of that 21-day process, the commissioning client has got a selection of offers to choose from. So that's single stage tendering. 2-stage tendering has got a pre-qualification stage where you might narrow the field down. You might narrow them down in terms of their competency by saying, well, we're looking for somebody who can do this, this, and this. Bring forward, you know, your case studies, tell us about yourself. We don't want 20 firms to waste their time bidding for one job. We're going to just choose the 4 that are most likely to win this, and put more time into making sure that their supply chain is really tight and that they bring back the best price for you. A negotiated tender, it's more akin to the single stage tender, because it might be that there's only one viable supplier, maybe even within that 2-stage process, when you've sort of explained what you need. And I think this is the way that quite a lot of our work is going, that there is one firm who is so specialist that they're kind of almost the only place that you can go for that service. So instead, you would go back to them and you'd say, look, can we set another benchmark by which we can make sure that we've got value for money and all those procurement principles are upheld. It's just a sort of in principle question, how would you and how have you been going about commissioning a digital twin? You might ask your architect or surveyor or engineer to sort it out. You might ring round a couple of firms. You might even, now you've been on the course, you might pull out that historic England specification and write your own specification or brief and put it out to people who you know could fulfill it. Not necessarily 2-stage, but get it done that way. Or if you're very regularly commissioning these, you might just have somebody that you usually work with, and you know what the rates are, and you don't tender at all. You just go for a negotiation. And I think that's more or less what I expected. In procurement, there is more than one way to do it, and I think choosing your procurement pathway is part of the art of procurement, and making sure you're doing something that's right for you, right for your client, and right for the marketplace that you're going into. Thanks so much. Thanks for taking part in that. In terms of the procurement process, I mean, it's one of these diagrams where it imagines that you step neatly from one stage to the next in a staged approach, where you set about thinking about what you might need, you put together your business case, you start to think about whether it's viable. There probably ought to be a little loop off there if you were here in session 9, where you might need to go and get some subsidy or grant aid because you can't fund it yourself. Once you've done the business case, you can see that with a little bit of subsidy, you might be able to do it. At that point, you might start talking about a grant. Then you think about that procurement approach, what's right for you. I think if you are using a grant such as Heritage Lottery, they apply the procurement regulations because you are effectively using public money. And you will fall into all that public procurement stuff, which tells you, depending on the size of your project, this is the route that you need to go through, this is your approach. At the end of that process, you should be able to have identified your supplier. You'll be able to have a look at what it is that they're offering you and whether you need to buy in a bit more or whether you can maybe economize. And it's not unusual at this tender evaluation stage to do a bit of value engineering and go, do you know what? We can't afford all of this. We don't need all of this now. Let's just maybe trim it. You put your contracts in place. You go to do your work and then you close out. And I do urge you at that stage to always reflect and find out whether you've gone through that process thinking, no, if I did it again, this is what I would do differently. And again, there's all sorts of loops on here. I mean, sometimes once the contract is started, you get the opportunity through new funding to do something slightly different, so you will adapt it. I think these are some of the things that you would expect to get through those tendering processes. You need accountability. You need to be able to tell people what you've done, especially if you're using other people's money, OPM as I call it. You need to be able to tell people what you've done and why you did it the way you do. It's got to be auditable. Obviously, you want that assurance that that the funds have gone to the thing that they were intended for, especially now because there are obviously other separate regulations around trying to stop modern slavery or money laundering. That auditability is really important. And making sure that you did meet your brief and that you haven't missed anything out. And obviously trying to build confidence in the public about in our society and procurement processes in general, which is this helping reduce claims of corruption. So in terms of procuring digital twins, I felt very fortunate yesterday to talk to Bola Abisogun, who is an expert actually in social housing, also an expert in digital twins. And he had quite great advice for us, which I'm going to just run this short VT for you now.
For those that are observing, I'm the Chief Excitement Officer. Yes, you heard me. Chief Excitement Officer of the Digital Twin Skills Academy. My name is Dr Bola Abisogun OBE. And I'm a chartered quantity surveyor for my sin.
How important is use case within the overall procurement process?
Yeah, so the easiest way to answer that question is just to think about the output. What do you actually want to achieve, right? In its simplest form. And use case really speaks to and for the why. Why are we doing this? Forget how much you want to spend for a minute. Why are you doing this? How do you want to use the data and the output? Who else should have access to the output? And how can you make it really easy for suppliers to understand what you really want? We can start there. The use case starts there. It's an idea. It's a ambition. It's even understanding what you don't want to procure. what you don't want to see at the end of the project, right? You've got to, I call that the upside down version of the question, right? What don't you want to happen?
I hope that was useful. I mean, as you can see, I adore Bola, and he really helped me with all of that. So in terms of specification, you will know that in order to specify what you want from a twin, you're going to have to put a red line on a plan. And you're going to have to think about what it is you require in terms of deliverables, and in particular, what level of detail you're going to need. There is a world of difference in terms of accuracy, especially between things that you can do yourself and those that are done with geospatial professionals. Think about what the intended use of the data is. I mean, a lot of the data is very flexible, but you can build that in from the start within the specification. Knowing when you need it and how much you can afford to spend on it will make a world of difference to what you put into the specification as well. In terms of putting that red line on the plan, obviously having the full address, and when we're doing it, we actually put a link to the list entry because that has got a grid reference on it as well. So there's no mistake about which heritage asset it is that you want to survey. Marking out the extents, in fact, picking up within that which buildings in particular you want. So in this example on the right here, the Lich Gate's been excluded, but the church is included, and this outbuilding down here. Anybody bidding for this work is going to need to know about you. They'll also want to know what's involved in terms of access. Is it very overgrown? This can make a world of difference to the data collection. Is it land that they can go on at any time? Well, how safe is it? We spent a whole session talking about risk assessments. Do they need support to go about their work? And in particular, will they need anything for their own safety and security? This is important too, and this is where you will rely on a geospatial provider, is if you want it related to the ordnance datum. You can do an arbitrary datum and still get some very good data out of that. But again, for the scale of the survey and its intended purpose, you will need to be able to work this out. And also in terms of the ordnance grid, are you going to make sure that it ties into and is repeatable with other models, or are you happy for it to stand alone? In terms of your outputs, do you want something like this reality capture model that people can share in a web share, in which case it may well need to be downsampled? What level of detail and you can put up into a shared space compared with what you can achieve if you're using your own servers? That will depend again on who is going to be using the data and what they're going to be using it for. If it needs to be measurable because you're sharing it with your QSs and you want cost data, then obviously that will make a difference to which platform you put it on and the level of accuracy. And obviously, going back to what Bola was saying, is what don't you want in terms of outputs? Well, if you don't want to lose the data, if you really want to safeguard it and record it, you should be thinking about that at the point of specification, knowing how big the model might be, and therefore where you can store it and what you'll be putting in the metadata so that it can be found later. We spent some time with James Kavanagh talking about, and with Chris Jackson as well, talking about level of detail in terms of how practical it is to get very, very detailed models. That will make a big difference to the cost of them. And in actual fact, whether in fact you need that amount of detail, over specifying is not in anybody's interest, especially if you're using grant aid. You need to be efficient with it. And also in terms of the resolution and the accuracy, is this is something else we covered off with James, is do you want it to be repeatable, and can you test its accuracy by these agreed standards? If you're taking drawings, which elevations will you need? This is a very simple structure. It's only got 4 sides, so you can see there that'll be 4 elevations, E1 to E4. But actually, at the point of commissioning the model, it is worth saying what you want on those outputs? Do you want them as orthogonal images from a photogrammetric model because they're great for marking up? Or do you need something that's got layers in it, like a standard CAD drawing or even a BIM model? And from all of that data, it will start to fall out what budget you need and whether that's the main priority. Do you think that the priority might be more to do the quality of it? In which case, you won't necessarily be doing that price only scoring. You'll go through to a situation where you do price and quality 60-40 or whatever, which is more usual in public procurement. And we talked about most advantageous tender. That's how you set your criteria to working that out. In previous sessions, we've also looked at specification guidance, and Historic England have put a lot of work into helping people in our situation who want to commission models with what the specifications look like. And we touched on this in previous session, I think session 6. I really encourage you to look through this because it's almost got a template specification that you can fill in for your project that poses all of those questions to you. This is for people who are on the supply side. So I think if you're a geospatial provider, I wanted to know from your own experience, how do you usually work out a price for a client? And I know this was a question in a previous session. So the options that I've provided in the poll are you working to a written brief, such as that standard specification, modified maybe just to take into account your particular needs? Or are you just asking your client what they need and doing something that's entirely bespoke for them, building up a bespoke specification? And the third option is whether you're working to a mix of those, because you've got old clients who've already worked up their own bespoke specification with you, so you're able to use it time and again with them. And whenever a new client comes through the door and they do that thing again that Bola said, which is get me a digital twin, it's like, hang on, we're going to have a chat about this because it's not as simple as that. It's mostly a mix or bespoke. That's really interesting to me because I wonder whether in future that first option of working to the written specification, which remember has only been published in the last sort of 12-18 months, whether that becomes more normalised, that is what people are using to sort of standardise the specification process. And that will help a lot with procurement, because then you're comparing apples with apples and not lots of different bespoke products. I don't think that negotiation will ever not be a part of procurement, but I think in future where there is more grant aid and more public sector investment in the digital economy, that actually having these specifications and being able to do comparisons will be really important for us. If you've got a mo, we'll go back into market test protocols. I wanted to talk for a minute about soft market testing. So the idea of launching a tender with your specification while you still don't know some of the really important things to put in the specification feels quite risky. And I think when we spoke to the geospatial providers in that poll, what they were saying is that there is an element of soft market testing, that clients will come to them and tell them a bit more about their needs and they will quote for them. And it's not unusual for us to provide a quote that just gives them a gauge of the size of what they want to do, that then at that point the client can go away and then write the specification in a lot more detail, knowing what's available to them. And then they need to market test because they need to meet their grant funders' objectives. And they need to, obviously, out of fairness, offer the work to a range of providers. This also could be done through, as we were talking about, a two-stage process with a pre-qualification questionnaire, so that from the client side, you can sift out people who you think, I'd be wasting their time if I asked them for a quote because they probably can't give me what I need. They don't have the right equipment, or they're in the wrong region, or this project isn't of the right size for them. You might, in the pre-tender interview, be able to clear up some of the areas in your own specification where we ask for feedback in the pre-qual stages, like, is there something that you would need in terms of clarification before you could take part in this tender? And so it's a two-way process, and it might even be as formal as taking part in an interview. In terms of the tender at the end of the process, when you're comparing the offer, we have talked about whether you put weight on one thing more than the other. So they usually have 40% on price and 60% on quality. That's our experience, because in the heritage sector, although the price does follow the quality to some extent, the other factors, such as somebody who's seen the site before or where they've got existing data, might be weighted towards them, because they can actually get to the site quicker, and they can offer you other benefits that are not contained in the price. The weighting for those quality assessments is worked out through the method statement. And again, in the previous section, when we talked about risk control, we talked about what you would put into a method statement so that everybody understands exactly not only how they will do the work, client side and contractor side, but also so that you can reduce risk. The scores are very often seen by a panel of people because there's an element of subjectivity about it. And there will be different people within the client side body who themselves are maybe more technical, or that they're more user focused, and they'll be able to bring their own skills and experience to that scoring. And after they've been scored and evaluated, it's really, really important, if you're client side, to give feedback. A lot of effort goes into providing tenders, and we really like to hear good feedback and bad. You know, we've had great feedback where they said, oh, you absolutely smashed it on quality, but sadly by the time we took that into account with your price, it wasn't as viable as another offer for us. And you know, we go away from that and think, well, we gave you our absolute best price, you know, there's nothing we can do about that. Other times they will give you feedback and say, well, actually, you know, you could have clustered the sites together and that would have made a big difference to us. So it's really important that you give that feedback.
I think one of the things about procurement, particularly sort of with a project manager hat on, it's a lot of processes, and of course you need that process, because the aim is to be fair. You know, you want to be absolutely open and fair. But equally, one thing I sometimes remind myself is that you're looking for the right person for a particular job. So it's sort of, you know, you could have lots and lots of companies who could come back with really great responses. And ideally, you only want to see tenders from people who could theoretically do the work, but it's looking for the right company for the right site, isn't it? It's not an award that, you know, it's the best company. It's the best company for this site, who are, you know, are best equipped to deal with a particular site, and the sites themselves are also different, aren't they?
Many moons ago, I can remember when I was first, I might even have been still at university, we used to say that a really well-run tender, your efficiency and your knowledge and skill comes through with the numbers, which is why very often in the past there was no quality score, because it was expected that if you were very good at doing this, that you would automatically be able to provide value for money. I think that's less true now, because people maybe take like a loss leader approach, especially on very large projects. I think that's a real risk with digital twins. If you're commissioning them through your surveyor or architect, at this stage in the process where it's not got any proven viability, we don't know what the intervention itself is going to be like. It might be just priced very, very low, even on a loss leader basis. Is like, let's find out about this. We're really interested to go further. But I think there's hazard in that, because you'll have seen this within those heritage lottery grants, where you have your development grant and then you go back in the market, and you sometimes have to change teams when you go into the second stage, and there is a risk and an inefficiency around that. So I like things to be accurately costed, that, you know, that it's an ethical issue as well. I think if something becomes so cheap that either somebody's been exploited, and I know that in geospatial quite a lot of processing can now be done not in the UK, not subject to UK labour laws, that really worries me. You know, it's a very competitive situation. That can happen.
And I think that's why that kind of balance of cost quality is so important. And obviously, If you have funders on board, they're always a source of information as well to be assisting, and might have ideas on how to balance the cost quality. So that, yes, so when you get to the best result, as you say, the best result isn't synonymous with the cheapest result. It's the result that, looked at globally, best fits and is going to deliver the best result for that particular site and the particular needs of that project.
Very interesting. Thanks so much for coming. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.